What if you could travel the world for a year and invest in your landscape photography as you go? Sound impossible? It might not be a possibility right now, but that doesn't preclude it from being a possibility in the future. Hi, I'm Jonathan Lee Martin. I'm a landscape photographer, digital nomad, and educator. And on this channel, I love helping new and seasoned landscape photographers accomplish their goals by lightening their load so they can go further. By day, I'm an educator. I teach a web development bootcamp here in Atlanta, Georgia, where it's currently a really chilly 90 degrees and humid. But teaching is just half of my life. I invest every spare moment I can in my landscape photography and as a travel writer. For several years, I've been on the journey of adopting the digital nomad lifestyle. Being a digital nomad isn't just about traveling all the time, it's about embracing a lifestyle that enables you to pursue opportunities without any regrets or obligations to tie you down. It's a mindset that you can apply now long before you hit the road. I've been personally adopting the minimalist mindset for several years now, honing my travel setup and eliminating barriers. But finally, I'm ready to hit the road. I'll be kicking off a landscape photography travel sabbatical for 6 to 12 months. I'll be vlogging on location as I go, and I'll continue to blog on fstoppers and yellowscale.com. But what about you? How could you get here? Is this something that's feasible for the average person? Now, it's not really something that you can just snap your fingers and decide to hop on a plane tomorrow to go on a travel sabbatical, but you have to start sometime. So if positioning yourself to take a travel sabbatical sounds intriguing, it's a journey that you can start today. But the first step is you need to convince yourself that the travel sabbatical is worth it. How are you going to convince anyone else that a travel sabbatical is the right decision for you if you're not even convinced? A sabbatical is not meant to just be a vacation. Now sure, you might have a rough situation at work which you need to recharge from. You might have some landscape photography destinations that you want to hit, or you just want to grow your portfolio. Or maybe you just want to see the world. These are all great reasons, but you need to make sure that you have some very solid reasons that you very carefully listed out. In fact, I would recommend writing them down. Part of convincing yourself is articulating those reasons. If you just have them floating in your head, it's not going to convince yourself very well, and if you try to tell someone else what you want to do, it's going to fall on deaf ears. And if you don't convince yourself, you're only going to notice the things that you're giving up. Because yes, to get here, you're going to have to give up a lot that you might take for granted, especially in the US. I'll add one reason to your barrage, and that is that normally we do travel at the end of our lives. Maybe you retire around 60 or 65 and you decide that's a good time to travel. But if you think about it, travel has a very transformative power on our lives. By moving that transformative event to the tail end of our lives, we're now neglecting the 40 years prior that could have been enhanced by these travel experiences. By front-loading them and having them earlier in life, travel has a chance to alter how you perceive the world for those 40 years, so that way your life is enriched. The second question you want to ask yourself is, what do you expect to get out of the travel sabbatical, and what would a successful travel sabbatical look like? I personally articulated a lot of different goals that I want to have, and if I come back from my travel sabbatical having accomplished those, I'll consider it successful. You really don't want to think of this as a 6 to 12 month vacation, because a vacation may not necessarily have a strong direction. Maybe lounging on a beach somewhere is your dig. For me, I would find myself very restless and not having a direction to keep me motivated during this time. I consider it an investment. So delineate those goals and articulate them so that way you know when you come back that you've accomplished it. The third question, and this is what people normally think of when they think of a travel sabbatical, is what are you giving up to pursue travel? Now, there's a lot of obvious ones here. You're probably not going to be able to take a travel sabbatical and keep your job. There are a few jobs like that, but unfortunately they're pretty rare, so you're probably going to have to say goodbye to your current job or put it on hold if you're still on good terms with your employer. Well, that may be totally worth it. But still, to make sure that you have a really good view of just what the cost is, you want to sit down and delineate what your current salary is and all the expenses you are currently paying. Then follow it up and try to predict for a trip, what would your expenses be for that time? Add all those up, and the difference between what you would have been making net while you had a salary versus what you would be outlaying now that you're traveling, the difference between those is going to be your opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is a more realistic way to take into account the fact that you are giving up a full-time salary to travel. But that said, it also takes into account that there are certain expenses that you may not have to pay now that you're traveling overseas. For example, if you're traveling overseas, you probably could drop collision on one of your vehicles. There's a lot of cases like that where it might not actually be much more expensive to travel abroad than it is in the US. So that said, the main thing you're probably giving up is the full-time salary, whereas you're also taking on the cost of more expensive hotels and B&Bs. But just to make sure that you have an appropriate view of what you're giving up, go ahead and tally up what you're currently making against all your current expenses, and then compute the expenses of a travel sabbatical, and the difference between those will give you your opportunity cost, so that way you can very clearly see what you are giving up. Number 4, what obstacles do you need to start removing now? You might have a lot of things holding you back from doing this, and while you can't tackle them all in one day, over a period of 1 to 3 years, you could start knocking them out. So the key is to start listing them out. Again, you don't want these just floating around in your head because they won't get removed. So I recommend going to a to-do list, maybe just a journal or a website like Trello.com, where you can start listing out all of the things that are holding you back, and then every week, pick one of those to eliminate, replace, or just decide that you're going to have to keep. Over the several years that I've been adopting the minimalist mindset, I've been challenged to question every single thing that I depend on, whether it be a comfort that I expect day to day, or whether it be simply some things that are based on having a physical address. These are things that I've tackled 1 week at a time, so that way over a period of several years, I'm now in a position where when I step on a plane in a couple weeks, it's gonna be life-changing, but at least I'm not gonna have a lot of crazy logistics to deal with at the last minute. So begin eliminating those barriers, tabulate them first. Here are some common ones you'll probably run into. The number one thing that holds us back is debt. And this is to be expected, unfortunately. The average American has $137,000 in debts. And that's a lot to hold you down. Debts tend to fetter us. Now, it might make financial sense to take on certain kinds of debts, like a mortgage, but there's a lot of debts that we take on that are not beneficial, like credit card debt. So over the next 1 to 3 years, you want to begin eliminating those sources of debt so that way you aren't tied down with that anxiety of dealing with those. I highly recommend Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. It's a great program for helping you tackle your debts and get the snowball effect going, so that way you can be debt-free and be able to take on some really cool opportunities without being held down by those debts. The one that most people think of are possessions. After all, you probably have a house full of stuff. And what are you going to do while you're gone? Are you just going to have to keep paying the mortgage and maybe have someone come check on the house every once in a while? What if you decide while you're overseas that you want to do this indefinitely? Maybe you want to turn it into a sustainable thing. Well, now you've got a house and a bunch of stuff that is calling you back home. For me personally, I've tried to adopt a very minimalist lifestyle. So I own very little. I have very little stuff. I have a lot of digital assets, but hey, goes on a hard drive, doesn't take too much room. And because of that, I can move out really easily and not have a lot of things to hold me down. We also tend to be held down by the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is a cognitive bias that causes us to overestimate how much we're losing out on something as opposed to what it is costing us to hold on to it. For example, if you have a piece of antique furniture and haven't been able to sell it, it seems wrong to just send it on its way or donate it to someone. But the fact is, it's a sunk cost. It's a cost that you can't recoup and you can't necessarily sell, and by holding on to it, you're costing yourself in terms of storage, anxiety, and probably some stubbed toes. So the sunk cost fallacy tends to really hold people back when they're thinking about getting rid of their possessions because they may not be able to get a lot of money for it. So just remember that whenever you have a sunk cost, meaning you have something that you can't recoup the costs of, there's nothing you can do about it. So with that in mind, with that cost out of mind, now ask yourself, what is the most beneficial decision I can make right now to bring me happiness or to bring in some sort of value? Very often, that's going to mean getting rid of the thing. The main thing that has personally held me back is fears of traveling. There are a lot of different comforts that we rely on from day to day that we may not realize are holding us back and causing us to be a little bit terrified and anxious of what'll happen when we go overseas. I've listed these out, these different fears and comforts that I'm afraid of losing, and every week or so, I tackle one to figure out if I can remove that dependency, if I can at least alleviate it, or if it's something that I absolutely have to have and have to support. And over a period of several years, I've gotten to the point where I have a lot less fears about what I'm going to be missing when I go overseas. Which brings us to the last point, and that is hold true to your intent. You will receive no end subtle hints in the terms of radio silence or just outright negative hints. When people hear that you're going to do this sort of thing, when they hear you're going to take a travel sabbatical, that's incredibly unusual, especially in the US. We're work martyrs. So because of that, you're probably going to get a lot of passive-aggressive hints. If you have not convinced yourself that this sabbatical is worth it, you're not going to convince anyone else. That said, even if you have convinced yourself, you're going to have doubts, especially as other people begin to challenge the reasoning behind it. And so make sure that you've convinced yourself, written out those reasons, and then surround yourself with people who have given you counsel in the past and demonstrated that they care about your well-being. And from then on, hold true no matter what. You're working towards an investment, not a vacation, that's worth far more than what you're leaving behind. And I, for one, will be cheering you on, hopefully from a snow-capped mountain somewhere. I hope that encourages you to take a more active role in your next trip of a lifetime. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with the latest adventures, digital nomad tips, and landscape photography tutorials.